This is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show. Today, coming to you from Rasta Cowboy Records in beautiful downtown Tustin, California, with the man, the myth, the legend, bassist for Red Cross off in the Melvins, Stephen McDonald. Devo.
Devo are in Spirit of 76, which was amazing. I'm a big fan. I grew up with Devo. The only problem with Devo for me was that they were the first band of the original American punk scene that kind of broke into mainstream. So when I got into punk rock, none of the kids at school had any idea what it was, and I was sort of like a space alien. And this is 7th grade for me. And I remember that's what like the jocks and the surfers, everything, they would yell Devo at you because they had heard of Devo. And so that's the kind of cliche that hey, Devo, and I remember, and I still like Devo, but I mean, I liked the Germs more,
Did you bond with Mark Mothersbaugh?
Well, when we were making Spirit of 76, yeah, we hung out a little bit. They weren't in the movie very much, so they were probably only there for a couple days, and this is a long time ago, so I can't really remember any particulars, except for I remember we did end up with a manuscript of a book he was writing, and there was some really cool stuff in that. It was really arty and a little hard to follow, but you knew that the guy was tuned into channels the rest of us didn't get. Just amazed by them, and now I know so much more about them, just like they've released all these really early recordings from the early 70s, and they're super weird, and it's as weird as any krautrock you could dream up, and they're like these spud boys from Ohio, and so, they deserve their place in the pantheon of influential, groundbreaking rock musicians,
Have an encounter with David Bowie, ever?
So Bowie is definitely one of my favorite artists of all time. My friend Ella Black, she was the lead singer of a band, the second band I was ever in, Ella and the Blacks. She's really great at journaling. And she was part of the original LA punk rock scene. Ella's older than me, a little bit older. And so she's part of that whole scene of like Trudy and Helen Killer and the Screamers, the Germs, that X, that Danger House, the Hollywood scene. And she has all these journals, and she had a journal entry about the first Red Cross show, or just about that night. And we knew each other by then. And I had forgotten that Bowie showed up. According to her journal entry, Bowie was at the Hong Kong Cafe the night Red Cross made their nightclub debut. We were opening for Black Flag. I think we were added to the bill at the last minute. And Bowie showed up to the Hong Kong Cafe, which was like a smattering of weirdo punk rockers that basically lost their mind. I don't know if he saw us play. I don't know if he showed up after us. And this is 79, so it would have been around the time of Lodger. Mm-hmm. And he was just kind of coming down to, now we know about him that he's always interested in what was bubbling under. He was always interested in underground music and what was the next thing, which kind of makes him a hipster. Nowadays, I hear the Melvins are always so dismissive of the hipster assholes. And I'm always like, well, let's wait a second here. Like, what is a hipster? Let's define it, In many ways, if you think about from the Stooges' perspective, when Bowie swooped in on Iggy and wanted to leave those dirtbag Detroit rock band behind, I'm sure that the Ashton brothers thought of that guy as some hipster asshole from London, stealing their lead singer.
That's as close as you got to Bowie.
My first performance ever is likely that David Bowie saw it.
Jack Grisham from T.S.O.L.
I don't really know Jack.
You don't know Jack?
I mean, I've met Jack in recent years. He has a small cameo in an Off video, one of my bands Off. And but Red Cross supported T.S.O.L. a few times back in the early 80s. I remember maybe Mike more. Is Mike the bass player? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember.
Mike Roach.
Yeah, I remember him. He was, this guy. I was around that time. I was about 14 when we'd play with them. I remember we played a show at at SAR in Hollywood, and it was right when the Beneath the Shadows record came out, which is a bit controversial for them. Is when Greg Kewen joined the band on keyboards, and I remember the punk rockers were not down with the keyboards, which is so crazy to think that anybody would even notice like a different instrument on stage, much less it having such a big impact on whether or not something was going to be approved of. Yeah, I can go off on a real tangent about that. But at any rate, we played that show, and I just remember, I remember that was a crazy scene because all the cops were out there. It was on Sunset, and the riot squad was there, and Jack made the whole crowd sit down. Like moments before, it had been this huge mosh pit, and then he made everybody sit down. I guess it was sort of like some sort of peaceful resistance. But I can't remember how the whole thing turned. I'm sure some heads got bashed then. It was terrible. But yeah, they were nice to us. And then and then we played with T.S.O.L. a little bit later when Jack wasn't in the band. But yeah, we were on Posh Boy at the same time. I haven't read Jack's book. I hear it's really good. But I remember. And then my only other story would be that we were both on Posh Boy around the same time, and those guys were very tough. Me and my brother were not tough, and I know that they were almost thuggish, and his story is harrowing in his book. But Jeff and I were at the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know if we were playing. This is a club in Costa Mesa, and we went to the liquor store down the street. And when we went to the liquor store, we ran into Robbie Fields, Posh Boy, the guy who ran Posh Boy Records. And he looked at us and he was like seeing a ghost. And he just like, here, and gave us some money, which we'd never seen any money from anything we'd ever done. But we were too young to even know that we should get money, kind of. And kind of too young to know. And then when we got back to when we got back to the Cuckoo's Nest, we'd found out that T.S.O.L. had put the fear in Posh Boy and like really like roughed him up or made him believe that he was in serious danger. So, which I'm sure he probably deserved. I mean, those guys had done quite well at that point, so I'm sure he probably owed them plenty of money that he wasn't paying them. But so that's another T.S.O.L. very roundabout way, T.S.O.L. connection.
A favorite bass player of your youth?
Well, they're kind of all the same. I mean, the music that I loved as a kid, I still love today, But, well, I mean, I'm not sure of my youth.
I know you're still young.
Well, I mean, before I played bass in a band, I couldn't really tell what the bass part was in a song, So the music I grew up with when I was really young, all the classic rock stuff that I still listen to today, Beatles and Rolling Stones and Zeppelin and stuff, I probably didn't acknowledge the bass instrument until later, until I was playing it a lot. So later on I would go back and go, oh, that's what Paul McCartney's doing. That's what Paul McCartney's doing right there, and that's awesome. When I think of my youth, I think of all the punk bands I would go see, and I'd see that's when I was first in a nightclub seeing them play. And also Gene Simmons, loved Gene, all that, I do a lot of that still. It's had a massive influence on me. But, but all the punk bands that I would go see, John Doe, I remember, I loved what he did, and the Dills, Tony Kinman, the late Tony Kinman, and such a cool dude, tall and lanky with a T-bird down to his knees, and that's just off the top of my head. But my favorite bass players in general, though, nowadays are, the greats of rock and roll, John Paul Jones, Paul McCartney, and John Otwell.
How did former Castration Squad guitarist Tracy Lee become a member of Red Cross, and what do you think she brought to the band?
Well, she's very cool. I mean, she was in the Castration Squad. She was the cutest girl in the scene. It's funny, I recently talked to Flea and Anthony. I'm very good friends with Josh Klinghoffer, who plays guitar in the Chili Peppers now. We played together in Beck's band in 2003 and stayed very close. And I went to go see Josh play with the Chili Peppers, and I remember I was backstage with Flea and Anthony. I hadn't seen them in years and years and years. And all they wanted to do was talk to me. All they wanted to do was talk to me about Tracy Lee, because they had gone to school with her. they were in high school together at Fairfax High, and they were just going like, yeah, you knew Tracy. Yeah. She was really cool. It was like that. So yeah, that's what we had her she was in our band. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. The Castration Squad was an all-girl, all-female rock band, punk band, and they were kind of like proto-goth. They had this Diana Cancer or Mary Sims from 45 Grave was one of the singers. They had a couple of singers. And then
Alice Bagg in that
Alice Bagg, Mary Sims, and then this girl named Shannon, who was like, it's not with us anymore, but sort of Roz from Christian Death, they would say borrowed a lot from Shannon. And I think it's probably fair to say. And then this cool chick that was our age, roughly, like my brother's age, a couple years older than me, playing guitar with these like really hairy ladies, you know, like rough crowd, you know, and we just thought she was so cool. And she was also more Hollywood. Like we grew up in the suburbs, we were in Hawthorne, and Tracy grew up in Hollywood, went to Fairfax High. Her father is in the show business as well. So she brought a lot of cool. Also, I think that Jeff and I have always been big fans, obviously, of female rock, female musicians. And that was probably, you know, many reasons for that. At some point, I think we wanted to play with. We wanted, you know, we didn't want it to just to be a, you know, sausage party or whatever. You know, we thought we respected women, like, you know, we both have married strong women, and we just those kinds of guys. We want to be with peers, and that we are, you know, inspired by as well as attracted.
What motivated you and Jeff to cover the Charles Manson song "Cease to Exist" on your Born Innocent album?
The very first pressing of Born Innocent, on a very small label out of the San Fernando Valley, Smoke 7 Records. We didn't even list Cease to Exist on the record. We were actually, I mean, the record we recorded, I think came out, someone says 82, I think it was more of like an 81 kind of thing, but you know, we were playing it around 1980, 81, and because we were playing that song for maybe a year before that record came out, and in all reality, it's crazy to think that that was really only a decade, just a little over a decade after the
Helter Skelter.
Yeah, after the murders, and which, you know, I was born in '67, so I don't remember the murders, but that book Helter Skelter was in every home growing up with that. So, you know, and then we were so into rock history. The thing that probably really inspired us to do that song was like listening to Rodney Bingenheimer's show, and then I think Jeff read this book, The Family by Ed Sanders, and it really kind of it really spells out the connection between this hippie vibe going on in Hollywood on Sunset Strip, and then the connection that Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys had gotten involved with them, and they were living at his house. Then the Beach Boys did that song, Cease to Exist, but they changed the title to Cease to Resist. And I think that was part of when the shit went down, that might have been part of a catalyst to that. I know they were looking for a producer, and I don't know if they wanted to kill Dennis too, but Terry Melcher, I think, was a producer. Maybe he had something to do with that record. So all these like pieces of LA rock history, the folklore of the '60s scene on Sunset and all of Los Angeles, and then interacting with this crazy story of these murders that we knew about from these books, and that TV movie that was a big deal in the '70s. And by the time we were old enough to start our own band, we just wanted to take all that stuff in and just like vomit it back at people. Rodney Bingenheimer, we knew that Rodney Bingenheimer had known a lot of those Manson girls, you know, because him and Kim were always, you know, the whole love-in scene at the Griffith Park was really just a way for Kim and Rodney to get some tail, probably, you know. And Rodney even has this amazing story about supposedly after the murders went down and a bunch of, and I mean, after Charlie got busted, but there were still like remnants of the family living up at the Spahn Ranch. Kim and Rodney supposedly drove up to the Spahn Ranch in Chatsworth, got out of, I picture this, getting out of this gigantic GTO or something, and Kim just made this proclamation. And I'm imagining like, yeah, because it's this old Wild West town, Spahn Ranch, it was an old film set, so it looks like the set of Gunsmoke. And I imagine these like ratty-haired hippie kids like, peering out of the saloon door and seeing this GTO, what is this? And start to, more of them creeping out, like something from Omega Man or something. And then Kim supposedly made this proclamation: meet your new leader. And then it's Rodney, like, yeah, boss. Yeah, we're the new leaders, Because of that, we were afraid to even put that we'd written that we had recorded that song, because by 1980, 81, Rodney was still in contact with some of these people. And it's like, we might have thought that all that, those were interesting buttons to push, or just, you're going to get a reaction. And we were obviously still trying to figure it out ourselves, but we were obsessed,
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't think murder was cool. We didn't think what happened, what happened to Sharon Tate was cool. None of that. But it was also, you'd get a reaction from talking about it. And we think we were just intrigued by the power of that story, and intrigued by, because it's a cautionary tale, and hippies and groovy, groove, peace and love, and then all of a sudden, there's something really, and also it's a cautionary tale about drugs. What happened to those, Linda Kasabian, Pat and Leslie Van Houten. I've seen interviews with these ladies. Patricia Creamickle's passed away, I think, but Leslie Van Houten is still alive, and they're just like nice church ladies now, and then their lives were completely destroyed.
The best part of ex-Ramone drummer Tommy Ramone producing 1987's Neurotica album.
I remember it was great that we got to meet him and hang out with Tommy, and he was just a nice guy, and we asked him questions about the birth of the Ramones, and he was the guy that was he was a big part of their machine. Like, he produced their records too, or co-produced, and even after he stopped playing in the band, and and I mean, he had good stories. I remember there's a scene in one thing I remember. These are stupid things to remember, but in the Rolling Stones at Hyde Park, their memorial concert for Brian Jones. It's this famous concert in 1969 where it's like, I think 300,000 people assemble at a free concert in the middle of London at Hyde Park, and the Stones actually do a pretty dodgy set, and Mick Taylor got blamed for it, but it's actually Keith Richards who was very out of tune, not Mick Taylor. But and then also Mick was supposed to release like 3,000 Butterflies, but it was such a hot day, they were all dead before he opened the thing. So there's a smattering of Butterfly. Anyways, there's a pretty good video of the whole concert, and there's this one scene of this like dancing wild hippie guy who looks exactly like Joey Ramone. And I remember asking Tommy, is it possible? Could that have actually been Joey? And he said, yeah, it could have been. He was really kind of like a flower child. And, he could have maybe scraped the money together to fly. I mean, he definitely would have tried to. So it's possible. If you ever watch the Stones at Hyde Park and you see that, you'll know who I'm talking about. They show him for like maybe 30 seconds. It's very possibly Joey Ramone.
What was his approach to producing?
I don't know. I don't know if I learned much from that. I mean, it was so long ago. I don't know. I mean, the reality is with producers, we never really had like a great production experience. I mean, I really don't want to say anything bad about Tommy. He was a really sweet guy, but like the idea of this archetypal concept of like what the Beatles shared with George Martin. You know, I think of that. That's like some of this band with all this raw talent, and then you get this guy that's coming from a totally different place, classical music, and he was actually a comedy record producer, but he had classical chops, and he understood. He could hear in their music all the stuff that they didn't know how to musically articulate yet, and he was able to communicate that to them, and they had the facility to understand what he was doing, and it really kind of took what they were doing to this other level. And I think that's always the ideal of what like someone that gets called a producer. That's the goal of that. And then everybody else are just kind of like recording engineers, the guys that are just making either sound really good or not sound as good as it should. And but you know, to me, the best example of a producer, like to me, I always tell young bands this one. If you listen to the first two Alice Cooper records, which I love, they're awesome, Pretty's for You and Easy Action, and then you hear the third one, Love It to Death. And that's the first record. Their first record was sort of Frank Zappa kind of produced, and it's just a live recording, basically, of a very cool psychedelic band. By the third record, Bob Ezrin, this young musical genius, gets behind the helm and is given the shot. And you know, also the band is at this new place in their development, and that's where you get, you know, I'm 18. And that's where you get, Caught in a Dream, and that record is, you know, Black Juju. And the growth, it's you know, and I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the band touring a lot, but there's, you know, Bob Ezrin had a lot to do with the jump at making records, going from being a good live band to a good making records band. That's my example of great producing. You know, that would be my goal as a producer, to try to, but you know, a lot of times it's a combination of the right person and the right band, but there's so many other elements, you know, it's like there's chemical reactions, and it's really kind of hard to cultivate that. Maybe I could be like a Bob Ezrin or a George Martin. Maybe I could be that someday for the right band, but I don't know that Tommy necessarily was that for us. And I don't feel like Red Cross ever found a producer that was like that for us. We eventually landed on someone that was really great at recording records and let us just do what we wanted to do. With Tommy, for instance, I remember we played him Good Times, Bad Times by Zeppelin, and like do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, there's that bass line in those breaks, and they're like, that's the bass Tommy want. And his reaction was like, really? 1970? 1968? It's like, you know, you know, he was interested in trying to compete with what was happening in college radio at the time. And I've had that same experience. I remember when I produced a Donnas record, they played the first Motley Crue record, which was fine. It's kind of a tough record. But then except for Vince Neil, and then they played a Cinderella record. I was just like, I thought you girls were into the Ramones. What the fuck? You're playing me Cinderella records? Like, that is, like, you know, yeah, and that's when I realized it's like, okay, there's an age gap here, it was the first time I realized that's probably what Tommy Ramone felt like when we played him. When we played him the first Zeppelin album, he was kind of like thought, you know, we weren't hip, and my perspective, I think you should just listen to the band.
Skin tight, dude. No, that was great.
And the record was cool. The record turned out fine. But the experience was weird. I mean, it took me a long time to understand how to navigate those situations.
See, I got those girls the first time I met them.
I mean, I love them.
No, I'm just saying, like, I was able to relate with them, like with the Motley Crue. Yeah.
Right. I was surprised because what I didn't know is that so Jeff and I produced the Get Skin Tight album, which is their third record. And the first two records I was already a fan of, which was American Rock and Roll Machine and then just the Donnas. And it was very much like the female Ramones with a little taste of Runaways in there. And that was like so up my alley. But they were teenagers and I was in my late 20s. And then I later learned that they kind of had a producer that was a big part of their world. And they were getting away from him. And they were kind of like trying out their own wings, so to speak. And they just kind of they didn't really know much about me and Jeff. They just thought we were cool. But, and so, and I would never fault a young person for liking but at the time, when I was in my early 20s, I was still kind of caught up in, stuff that I'm not caught up in anymore. I'm way more open about things or whatever. But I remember being shocked, my taste in music it doesn't define me like the way it did as a kid, And so when someone does something that I totally don't get, it was at the time very confusing to me. Now I get it. It's like, it's a generational thing or whatever.
What were the highlights of the 1987 Neurotica tour?
I mean, we had some really good shows. That's when we started touring nationally more, and we still weren't touring internationally yet. The first show that kind of comes to my mind, I remember we opened for the Bangles, back to us being groupies, but we opened for the Bangles of the Greek, and that was cool. That was at the height of their Manic Monday success. We played in Seattle and Tacoma. I can't believe I'd forget this. Hang out at the Melvins. In Tacoma, Washington, we had a show that we headlined that was the opening bands were a group called Malfunction and then Green River, who were members of Mudhoney and Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden. Those were the opening bands. At Malfunction, the lead singer of Malfunction started that band. What was the band that before Pearl Jam? Not
Mother Love Bone.
Yeah, the singer of Mother Love Bone was the singer of Malfunction. We've been told that was an important moment in that scene.
What do you remember about you and your brother Jeff performing as members of the Riptides in the 1996 movie Grace of My Heart?
The film by the filmmaker Allison Anders. Mm-hmm. And that movie, Grace of My Heart's a great movie. I would like to see it again. It's loosely based on the story of Carole King. And then there's a part in the film where there's like a Brian Wilson-like character played by Matt Dillon. And it's supposed to take place in the 60s. And this guy is kind of losing his mind, and he's making this beautiful, groundbreaking music. And so I play one of his bandmates, the Riptides. And so I'm one of Matt Dillon's bandmates, and so is my brother. And Jay Mascis is the engineer in the studio and the scene. And they're playing us basically his pet sounds. And then we cut to ad-lib a bit, and I came up with the line, how are we going to do this live? And supposedly, Allison Anders played a rough cut for Martin Scorsese, and he said, that line, that's brilliant. So that was the crux of the problem when Brian did that. All they could think was, how are we going to do this now? What are we going to do with this live?
Did you bond with any of the actors?
Matt Dillon was nice, I think he was actually friends with Jay. Ileana Douglas was nice. Recently, Allison posted pictures from another movie she did later called Things Beneath the Sun, and there was a picture of Don Cheadle, and we were in this movie too. And that was the first time I was like, oh, I remember that, because Don Cheadle, who's a very much respected actor now, but I remember he wanted bass lessons from me. We had some scenes with them, and I think now he's probably won an Oscar or something. And I was like, oh yeah, I've acted with Don Cheadle before.
If you believed there was a hell, would Hitler be rotting there?
Well, yeah, he's a bad guy. I mean, isn't that something that we can all agree on? There's lots of controversy about who's the bad guy nowadays, Donald Trump or blah. Everyone agrees. I mean, there might be some asshole somewhere that, Manson guy, that Hitler's their hero, but for the most part, he's the bad guy. He's rotting in hell.
Merge Records has released 2 of your albums on vinyl, and Third Man Records has released 2 of your albums on vinyl.
Merge just reissued Teen Babes from Monsanto. This came out in '84 originally, and then a record called Hot Issue Volume 1, which is a collection of rarities that my brother put together a couple years ago. That just came out in December. And then later on this year, it hasn't come out yet. Third Man is slated to reissue Phase Shifter, and Show World, which were records from the mid-90s.
Is that Jack White's idea? How did that happen?
No, someone actually Dave Buick, he's got great taste. He works at Third Man Records. It was his brainchild. Well, we were kind of co-conspirators on it.
And then what's the new Red Cross album sounding like so far?
Bitchin'.
You're supposed to say this is the best album we've ever done.
This is very Paul Stanley. You know, this is the best material we've ever done. We're really gonna wow people with this next show. No, it's I love Paul, but like I know him. I love that old broad, but I just think I'm excited for this record. We had to finish a couple tunes. I have a deadline next month. I got to put the fire under my brother's ass to get some of his lyrics finished. But other than that, I'm very excited about the record. Or also, that process is kind of funny too. So I think it's gonna, I'm just so excited that we're working a lot. I'm very grateful to be doing this. It's neat that we're having records back in print, and that we can interact with other musicians that inspire me. And, it's always so hard to get all the ducks in a row, like they say. But I'm trying to make it happen this year. And to have all these records be released prior and then put out a new one, go out on tour, be able to, we've got a few fans on the social medias now that we can really utilize that network and let people know. And it's sort of like a long-term goal, feeling like it's sort of being fulfilled right now. So it's an exciting time.
Thank you, Stephen McDonald. You rock. All right, this is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair Show, signing off.
The Blairing Out Show.